So next up, we're going to have Senator Warren Hamilton of District 7 for a legislative update. Senator Warren Hamilton was first elected to the state Senate in 2010 to represent District 7. Warren grew up on a ranch run by his parents, who were both school teachers. He joined the Army in 1989 when he reported to the United States Military Academy at West Point, New York. He graduated in 1993 and reported to flight school at Fort Rucker, Alabama, earning his wings in 1994. He flew scout helicopters in Bosnia and Fort Polk, Louisiana. Hamilton served as a platoon leader and company commander, liaison officer, Marine Light Attack Helicopter Squadron 367, serving as an instructor and flight lead. His squadron deployed to Japan, Thailand, the Philippine Islands, and ultimately to Iraq. Hamilton completed his service obligation in the spring of 2005 with the rank of major and returned home to the ranch he grew up on. In the summer of 2006, he returned to Iraq, this time as a defense contractor, flying helicopters in Iraq and Afghanistan until his last flight in the spring of 2012, whereupon he returned home to Oklahoma to spend more time with his wife, Sherry. Together they own and operate Rocky Point Ranch and have 4 children ranging in age from 26 to 4, plus 2 grandchildren. Hamilton is a devoted Christian and patriotic American and is grateful for the opportunity to serve both his state and country. With that, I'll welcome up Mr. Hamilton.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. If you don't mind just clipping that on and speaking to the microphone. That's
Sure.
live, so.
All right. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much for your time and for your hospitality. And before we go any further, I think she's already left the building, but a huge thank you to Commissioner Arthur for being here. You know, it's just like all of y'all, she's got stuff that she's got to do on a Saturday. And I think it's awesome that we've got people like her and like Representative J.J. Humphrey who have taken of their time to be here on a Saturday and support what we've got going on here. I appreciate the work that Andy's done, and ultimately I appreciate God for his providential hand in blessing us with, number one, with safe travels here today. Number two, the opportunity to do what we love, and a thing that's actually a good field of endeavor. But ultimately, I want to thank him for us being blessed through no merit of our own with being here in the United States of America and being American citizens. With that being said, I've got I'm up for re-election in 2024. I've got some of my campaign materials over here on the table. There are, if you leave here without picking up a Constitution, there's some of mine, there's some of another great American left some there. I've also got some pens. So we've got constitutions, and we've got pens that you can write your legislators with, or your other elected officials. So we're 2/3 of the way there on our domestic terrorist starter kit. The only thing we're lacking is a Bible. And we had a pastor talk to us this morning, so maybe that'll count and we can all be labeled insurrectionists or something like that. I don't know. But I've also got some envelopes over there. Freedom isn't free and neither is a campaign. I don't take any money from lobbyists or from PACs, but I ain't got a problem in the world with taking money from everybody here in this room, provided you're willing to give it. So I appreciate your consideration. So thank you for that. What I want to talk to you today, we've touched on this, and I see a gentleman here in the front row with the Stop the Land Grab hat. And so everybody's in this room favorite Senator Casey Murdoch. He ran an interim study on the 30 by 30 land grab. It's a big deal. And so it's important that we know where we are. That's, I'm a soldier by trade. I don't care if I'm 80 years old, I'll always be a soldier. And the most important thing you can know as a soldier is to know where you are on the battlefield. Now, we didn't get where we are overnight. Has anybody ever heard of a group called the Fabian Socialists? Okay. So the Fabian Socialists, if you haven't heard of the Fabian Socialists, you know their methodology. They use the boiling frog analogy. Stick the frog in the comfortable water, turn it up on the stove, and eventually the frog will just let you boil them to death. Well, that's kind of where we've been since our inception. The big, I guess, the face of the enemy that we see today is George Soros, and I happen to think that George Soros is in league with China, who I think is one of the heavy hitters, if not the heavy hitter behind all of it. Now, the Chinese have the advantage over us. We have roughly 1,000 years of Western culture. Well, the Chinese have 4,000 years, in excess of 4,000 years as a nation. They also have one of the greatest thinkers in the world, Sun Tzu, who wrote his book, and in it he talks about that deception is the key to all warfare. And where I go with that is because there's a lot of things that have happened throughout our history, and some of them are absolutely, they're obvious that they're bad. Okay, and there's some other things that I'm going to touch on here in a minute, like, for example, the Endangered Species Act. Well, who doesn't want to protect animals? I mean, there's some, snail darters and stuff like that. Who really cares? But there's things like, buffalo, bald eagles, Rocky Mountain elk, that kind of stuff. Nobody wants to see those go away. So everybody can get behind the Endangered Species Act, right? Well, the best lies are 90% truth. And so that's one of the things that we've got to be cognizant of when we're dealing with all of these things that we see. Now, the reason I kind of pick on the Chinese is I recently read a book. I didn't realize this was the case when I ordered it, but it's written by two colonels from the People's Liberation Army. And in this book, and this was published in the 1990s, and recently translated to English. In this book, they cover everything that they're planning on doing, and they cover the different arenas of warfare. So they cover things like financial warfare, information warfare, biological warfare. They've got different levels of warfare. So when we think of warfare, especially if you're not a soldier, what you think of is you've got this army lined up against this army, and they're butting heads and smashing swords and bayonets and everything like that on the battlefield. Well, that's not always the way it works. And in fact, if you're not the one who has lots of human lives to squander, it usually doesn't work out in your benefit. The Chinese have mastered the art of deception. Sun Tzu also said, build your enemy a golden bridge, ... for him to retreat across. And so what does that look like here? Well, we've got economic development. So I just talked with a good friend this morning. She said, hey, there's somebody from the World Economic Forum that wants to invest, and they've got some stuff, the typical Green New Deal things, solar power, solar farm, drone this, AI that, and so on and so forth. And what they're doing is they're going to bring $1 billion of their dollars and they're going to invest it in Oklahoma. Well, on the surface, there's probably 99 out of 100 people in Oklahoma that are going to see this and go, $1 billion that didn't come from us is going to get invested here. I'm done. It's good. Sign me up. Well, there is a positive aspect to somebody bringing $1 billion and investing in Oklahoma, but there's usually a hook associated with something like that. And so that's where we come in, and we're supposed to be looking for the hooks. Oh, I really love what Secretary Arthur talked about. She touched on a lot of things. Food security is national security. She touched on some of the government overreach that goes on, and that's a thing. That's not just something that us right-wing guys use to campaign on. It's really a thing. And so J.J. Humphrey, Representative J.J. Humphrey, he's been associated with this organization for a long time. If there's anybody in the legislature who typifies Wyatt Earp's quote from Tombstone, you got to do something about it or just stand there and bleed. It is the fightingest man in the legislature, J.J. Humphrey. So I don't know if you're on the agenda, but I want to give you a round of applause. He had he ran what was supposed to be an interim study, and he talks about several different agencies, both state and federal, that have some overreach going on here in Oklahoma. If you haven't watched it, do yourself a favor. Find it and give it a listen because it's really good. So here's some things where getting back on track. Here's some things that have happened regarding the Fabian socialism thing that, as it goes on in America. The most earth-shattering of them happened during the Roosevelt administration in the 30s when we had the New Deal, which also ushered in things like National Firearms Act of 1934, which ostensibly was about firearms, but it was about firearms that nobody had. Nobody had machine guns because people can't afford to eat, so nobody owns that kind of stuff. What it did was now establish that government has some authority to say something in an arena that they heretofore had said, this is not the purview of the federal government, this belongs to the states. Then we had the stuff that happened we kind of fell asleep for about 30 years. Okay, so we had after Roosevelt passed away, then we had the Truman administration. Okay, and Truman was a Democrat, but by the way, Truman was also, you can say what you want, that dude was a man. 20 years after the fact, when they asked him, they tried to hang him out to dry on dropping the atomic bombs and get him to pass the buck, he said, no, that was my call. I knew what I was doing. I made the decision, not the generals. I'm the president. So I got nothing but respect for that. So we had a guy like Truman that was followed up with 8 years of Eisenhower, who got followed up with Kennedy. Now, I'll remind you that when Kennedy was elected, you could order a gun out of the back of a magazine, have it delivered to your house, and if you found a good deal on 30-06 surplus and you got enough to buy 50,000 rounds, send it to the house. You know, keep it in the basement, whatever. You could strap that thing to the handlebars of your Humphrey, throw a crate of ammo on the back, pedal down to the river and shoot at wood blocks in the river all day long, and nobody would say boo about that. That's how the Kennedy administration started out. You know, Kennedy had an axe to grind against the bankers, and so he met with an untimely demise. My dad is a retired educator of 37 years in the public school system of Texas. He said public education was awesome until the 60s. That's when the National Education Administration really decided to grow some horns, and then at the federal level, we had various agencies that decided to get their nose into state level education, et cetera, and so we had government overreach beginning there. That's also where we decided that we were going to take prayer out of schools. What also happened in the 1960s is when we had the Gun Control Act of 1968 that got passed. That further established federal, well, I don't know what you want to call it, federal intrusion into what heretofore had been a state issue. So then we also had, and this is of particular relevance to what we've got going on here, in 1964, we had the Reynolds v. Sim case that the Supreme Court decided on. What that was all about was that said that in state legislatures, even in legislatures like Oklahoma, where you have a bicameral house, or bicameral legislature, that both houses have to be based on proportional representation. So a lot of people are like, yeah, that's great. You know, one man, one vote. Okay. Well, not so fast, because we don't have that at the federal level. It doesn't matter if you're North Dakota with 600,000 people in it, or if you're New York with 60 million people, you still get 2 senators. So our founders of Oklahoma established Oklahoma as the state senate in Oklahoma such that the 19 most populous counties each got 1 senator, and the remaining counties, each 2 of them shared 1 senator. What that ensured is that rural Oklahoma had a voice. I'm from rural Oklahoma. Senate District 7 covers 5 counties. Okay? Now you've got counties up here in the metro area where you don't even have 1 senator covering 1 county. You've got 1 senator covering a couple of blocks. You've got Senator Casey Murdoch. His Senate district encompasses 28% of the landmass of the state of Oklahoma. Okay, and you've got Senator George Burns down in deep southeast Oklahoma. His Senate district covers 5 counties as well. So this was a way, and on the surface it didn't look like it was a real big deal, but it's a way that we take the voice away from rural Oklahoma. Okay, and that's simply what it is. And when it happened in 1964, it wasn't that big of a deal because, heck, everybody was rural. Okay? Everybody had somebody that lived on a farm. So moving into today, what's kind of the big thing that's the most, I guess, the most glaring indicator of the whole 30 by 30 thing? Well, Senator Casey Murdoch, he did that interim study on Monday or Tuesday of this week. If you haven't found it, do yourself a favor and go look it up. Listen to it. He had Trent Luce was one of the guests, and then Trent also had him on his podcast after that. The big thing that we see here is the foreign and specifically the Chinese acquisition of land. Now, that's not an exclusively Oklahoma problem, but it is a problem here in Oklahoma. You'll kind of connect the dots and you'll see that a lot of these things are happening in close proximity to areas of somewhat strategic importance. For example, a lot of military bases. You know, why is it that we need to start a pot farm right outside of Altus or Vance or, Tinker or whatever else? I mean, why do we need to do that? Outside of Fort Sill. So these things are happening like that. There's industrial places that are being started that are being run by, no kidding, Chinese nationals. They have infiltrated academia. Both OU and OSU have Chinese nationals, not Americans that have a Chinese last name. We have actual Chinese nationals on staff. So best case, what they're doing is mining the best and brightest of Oklahoma for their intellectual property and then taking it back to China. Worst case, what they're doing is actual espionage. And I'm a skeptic, I'm a cynic, and I tend to lean that way. The governor recently just signed into law an executive order regarding election integrity. And there's a lot of people that are looking at this and going, no, police state, so on and so forth. Well, I don't see it that way. The governor is interested in making sure that what we don't have is foreign influence, specifically Chinese influence. And this is my interpretation. The governor didn't say these words. I haven't visited with him about it. But my interpretation is he's specifically worried about foreign interference in state and local elections here in Oklahoma. Now, per the book that I read about unrestricted warfare by the PLA colonels, that is happening. They said they were going to do that. So you don't have to have your tinfoil hat on to be worried about such things going on. They have infiltrated, there's the financial warfare aspect of it. So if you think they're not manipulating currency, they are. Anybody ever heard of BRICS? They're the C in that equation. Law enforcement. So at the local level, not so much, but at the federal level, it's there. Specific to law enforcement, there's a gentleman in the House named Rick West. He's run a bill in the House for the last 3 years, and I've carried it in the Senate. What this bill says is that we're going to change our statute. Right now in Oklahoma, you can be a resident alien and be a licensed peace officer in the state of Oklahoma. Now, if you think that's a good idea, go ahead and stick your hand up. Okay, good. Because I don't think it's a good idea, but I was trying to get somebody else to do it. The problem with that is that now if you're a resident alien, you're not an American citizen, and you're going to have people that are not American citizens conducting an arrest or investigation on American citizens that would deprive them of their rights. Now, to be fair, I'm not aware of a case where that's happening in Oklahoma, but we want to close that loophole. We don't want that to happen. Okay? So that's one of the things that's where that goes. Academics I mentioned, espionage I mentioned, and so I'll kind of bring this plane in for a landing with this. There's a lot that's going on out there it's like the way I look at this, and I don't mean to be overly denigrating, but I think the analogy is particularly apropos. When you discover roaches or termites or mice or something like that in your house, you don't just have one of those things. If you've got roaches, you've got termites. If you've got termites, you've got ants. If you've got those things, you've probably got a mouse. And there's usually something going on there. There's usually several somethings that are going on there that you don't want. One of the best, Casey Murdoch actually reminded me of this. What's the devil's most successful trick? And it is convincing us that he doesn't exist. That's the thing that China and these bad actors do. They're like, hey, look, man, everything's cool. Economic development, trade. Nixon, remember when Nixon was in the 70s and he opened the door to China and we got this trade and everything going on? We're like, hey, it's going to be great. We're all going to get cheap stuff. Well, the very same thing that we fought a civil war over 110 years prior to that was slavery. Well, China does the same thing. They just call it a different name. That was the very same thing. That's why the whole world banded together to excoriate South Africa and to embargo them and shut them down. Well, there's a newsflash. It was wrong when South Africa's doing it. Isn't it just as wrong when the Chinese are doing it? Or is it only wrong when the Chinese doing it, but when South Africa's doing it, you see what I'm saying? It's wrong because it's wrong, not because of who's doing it. And so we've got, in the legislature, we've got several bright spots. You've got J.J. Humphrey with his interim study, et cetera, on federal overreach and state agencies that have run amok. You've got, not in the legislature, but in a regulatory agency, you've got Secretary Arthur with or Commissioner Arthur with what she had to say. Food security is a national security issue. You've got Governor Stitt that said that the Chinese acquisition of Oklahoma land is a national security issue, and we need to put the stop on it. You've got him signing an order for election integrity. We actually got a bill signed into law, Senate Bill 212. It was authored by Senator David Bullard. And by the way, there's a bunch of us that authored non-foreign ownership bills this year. David just happened to be the one that got his pick to get heard on the floor. There's a little bit of a hole in this bill in that there's I don't know what you call it, a proviso, a loophole for the Attorney General to basically do the assessment on this. Well, we're the legislature. We answer the people. We do the assessment on it, and we've said if you're not an American citizen, you got no business owning land in Oklahoma. Period. The end. I don't care if you're a bona fide. Amen. So I don't care about your residency status or anything else like that. Oh, by the way, as far as that goes, here's one of these things to look for. Okay, we hear things like for the last 2 years in a row, we've heard the driver's license bill so that illegals can get driver's license in Oklahoma. So it's like, oh, they have an individual taxpayer ID number. They pay their fair share in taxes. Okay. Well, they already broke the law once by coming across the border illegally. They're breaking the law again by not driving with a license. Okay, and they're breaking the law again by driving without insurance. That's 3 strikes against you. You're out. Okay, I'm not going to roll the welcome wagon out for you so you can buy a driver's license. That's just how it is. Well, now the same guy that did this driver's license bill is working with the AG to do this same individual taxpayer identification number thing to say that these chuckleheads, my mother called it an invasion while we're sitting around my kitchen table in the 1980s, and she's absolutely right. She said this, and they just came in right now, but she said this: it is slavery wrapped up in the cloak of philanthropy. Oh, these guys are getting a raw deal in Mexico. They come over here, we let them sleep in the tool shed, we give them all the beans and tortillas they can eat, pay them $5 a day, and we think we're doing them a mad solid. Well, that ain't right. You're taking advantage of human misery the same as anybody else that's running a slave. You just don't have the responsibility of taking care of them. So that's exactly what this is. It's an invasion, okay? This individual taxpayer ID number, if you're not an American citizen, you have no business owning something here in America. This idea that they pay their fair share in taxes, anybody ever heard the phrase, no taxation without representation? That's where this is going. That's where this is going. Like, hey, yeah, I guess they pay taxes. They can have a driver's license. Well, guess what? If you're over here legally, not illegally, if you're over here on a visa of some sort, you can get yourself a driver's license. If you come over here on a tourist visa and you're within the confines of your tourist visa, you can drive on your host nation or your country of origin driver's license until the visa expires. So this thing is a total red herring. It's a way for the camel to get his nose under the tent. You got Cowboy Stevens that ran a bill last year about meat processing, so that when we have intrastate meat processing, or when we have sales from Oklahoma to Oklahoma, that the federal government, USDA, doesn't have to do it. We can employ the state of Oklahoma meat inspectors on that. And we can also do it digitally. So if I'm state of Oklahoma inspector and I've inspected your processing plant before, all I got to do, I've looked at it, it's clean. You're not washing things off with the fill tank from your cesspool or anything like that. We're good. I need to watch a video of it and everything's hunky-dory. So it cuts the burden down on the inspector having to actually be present when that's going on. So There's a bill that a constituent friend of mine presented to me about food sovereignty. There's a town in Maine that said, hey, government's got no authority to tell me I can't grow a garden in my yard, on my balcony, wherever. If I want to harvest my chickens and sell them to my neighbor, then I need to be allowed to do it. And so what you're going to hear from these regulatory agencies is, well, we're worried about safety. You're worried about this food safety and everything like that. Well, there's some merit to that idea. But here's the thing. Every year we lose 100,000 people to overdoses. Now, this ain't the ones that get Narcan and survive. This is the ones that die. We lose 100,000 people to drug overdoses of illegal drugs every year. Now, if you're worried, now, you know, you got hot and cold running fentanyl, and you got all these other drugs that are coming across and being sold here in the United States. I'm going to break it down for you like this. If I'm going to die, it ain't going to be because I ate a chicken that I got from you that didn't get processed in a USDA facility. Okay? That's just how it is. Okay? We had several senators run bills that put the kibosh on these big financial organizations that employ ESGs. You know, hey, we don't want that. We don't need that. If you're a financial institution that does ESGs, you're welcome to come to Oklahoma and ply your trade, but we're not going to have the state of Oklahoma do business with you, especially if you're going to lobby against our rights. We like your money, but you ain't getting none of it from the state of Oklahoma. For what it's worth, I don't really like those people either, the ESG kind. But we also got some other bright lights in the Senate. There's a guy named Adam Pugh. He's not a rural guy at all. He's from Edmond. He's the chair of the Education Committee. So Adam Pugh worked with me this year on my library books bill. Library books so that we don't have porn going into the school library. Adam also, a particular note to this group, ran a bill that said, hey, look, if you're doing a food business out of your own home, like I won't say he's a hayseed, but he is from a small town in Pennsylvania. And one of the ways his mom put food on the table was by selling pies and stuff like that she made at home. And he said, it's ridiculous to think that we got to have an inspection for my mom to be able to sell pies to somebody. And so we need to make sure that doesn't happen in Oklahoma. That's the guy we can thank for that. Okay. I mentioned the library books bill. There's a guy, I listen to the Jocko podcast regularly, and he had on it a year or two ago, a guy that came over from Poland, and the guy sought political asylum. He's a legitimate asylum seeker. They had him locked up in a gulag, and they were going to kill him. He immigrated to America, became a U.S. citizen, subsequently enlisted in the Navy, became a Navy SEAL. He was on the podcast talking about the way the communists worked in Poland. And what he said was, what they did was they stole elections. They presented things in the light of it's one thing, but it's really another. They were big promoters of sexual debauchery. They were big promoters of, hey, the family's not necessary. Big promoters of all your kids must go to the school. They wanted everybody to be intoxicated, so they were big promoters of vodka. So they didn't have marijuana in Poland. But now what we have over here, we've got medical marijuana. We've got organizations that want to have liquor by the drink, liquor on Sundays, and so on and so forth. So all of these things are part of the communist playbook. And the last thing I'll leave you with is the big kahuna that we've seen this last year. Governor Stitt did a fantastic job, and I don't know if any other man could have done it. But we had the tribal gaming, or the license plate compacts and the tobacco compacts that came up for a vote. And there's a very few of us in the House and Senate that said, we're not going to approve it. And the devil's in the details. Well, Governor Stitt recognized that the phraseology Indian country means a different thing post-McGirt than it meant pre-McGirt. And so you've had outside influence that has come in here and attempted to stir up division in a state where everybody, Indian, tribal, non-Indian, non-tribal, we've lived together in a state of peace since 1907, where we've all decided we're one people, okay, and now you have an outside influence coming in here and stirring up division and trying to basically destroy Oklahoma. What's the Bible say about this? A house divided cannot stand. Okay, that's it. That's what we're dealing with. And I bring up all of these things here in my talk with you today to remind you of this. There's not a boogeyman behind every bush. But sometimes there's a boogeyman behind almost every bush. And the Bible commands us to be sober and to be vigilant. Because our adversary, the devil, roams around like a hungry lion seeking whom he might devour. Now that place, right now, the bright light of the world is the United States of America. I've lived in several different places. I went to school in New York because that's where West Point is. I lived in Florida because that's when I was a contractor. That's where my office was. And I grew up in Texas. Now I live in Oklahoma. And the reason I came to Oklahoma was because of how conservative Oklahoma is. Oklahoma is the bright light of the United States of America. If Oklahoma falls, America falls. And I don't know how I can say it any plainer than that. And I'll close for questions. Yes, sir, you had a question. I don't know how to properly answer your question. I don't know how to quantify it. The impact absolutely does exist. That is why Governor Stitt sent troops down to the border. I've tossed around ideas with some legislators, and because the border isn't just down there. I mean, Texas has shut down some borders with New Mexico. We share a border with New Mexico, and they're not in favor of God, family, country by a long shot. In the book Empire of the Summer Moon, the author talks about the impact on the Comanche Nation, and he said that this was even in the day before the wheel had prominence here in the United States of America, that white culture was influencing the Indians up to 600 miles away. So I bring that up to say that if one culture was influencing another 600 miles away, where the primary mode of travel was either your go-fasters or a horse, and you're looking at roughly 20 to 30 miles a day if you're on a horse, a single horse, more if you've got a string and you're not worried about, killing them. You're looking at a long time to travel. Our border is roughly an 8 to 10 hour drive away from where I live in southeast Oklahoma. And I'm 2.5 hours north of the Red River. If you think that what goes on in the border is not influencing what's happening down in Zapata, McAllen, Del Rio, if those things are not influencing what's going on here in Oklahoma, you're going through life with your eyes closed. I had a friend of mine, he was a policeman in Porham before he came on with Haskell County Sheriff. He pulled over three guys in one car, military-age males, all speak Spanish, none of them got a word of English. They got a baggie of fentanyl the size of a football, guns, a banker's envelope full of cash. So he hooked them up, took them all to jail, and that's where we are. Why are these guys coming through Porham? Why we got three guys that don't speak English coming through Porham, Oklahoma, which is a suburb of Muskogee, at 2 a.m. with a baggie of fentanyl and some cash and a bunch of guns that doesn't make sense. So I don't know to what impact actions at the border are influencing Oklahoma, but they are. Especially when you've got the third country nationals that are not even Spanish speakers that are coming across the border. There's a guy, Vincent Rocco Vargas, he's written a book called Borderline. He talks about this, and he's like, there's just questions that need to be answered. Obviously we got the family coming over with the kids and the grandkids and everything. But then you got, 15 military-age males from India, from Pakistan, from Bangladesh, and you've got Muslims that are coming across. How'd you even get from there to Mexico? And why are you coming across the southern border? Again, you don't have to have a tinfoil hat on to think that this is a sleeper cell. Or maybe not so sleepy sleeper cell. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Amen. And that's a question that you're not the only one to ask that. I've asked that myself. I'm working with a lawyer friend of mine in a working group investigating specifically China. And the question is, look, if we know that they've acquired that many acres of land, then obviously we know who bought it. If we know who bought it and we know they're in violation of at least state law, why do they still own it? You know, so those are good questions. And if we know that they do still own it, then why do they still own it? Why are we not taking it back and putting it in the hands of Oklahoma citizens, i.e. through sheriff's sale or some venue like that? So there's a lot of us in the legislature that are asking the same questions and that are basically like, I don't care what we got to do. If there's already laws, well, then whoever's not enforcing it needs to get spanked. And if there's not laws, well, we need to make some. There's a question over here, I think. If Senator Bullard's bill does address it. And I visited with him this morning about it, and he is not happy with the proviso that got put in there. Like most of us are not. And full disclosure, there's a bunch of us, hyper-conservatives, me, Shane Jett, we all co-authored that thing. So it isn't what we want, but it is, for lack of a better expression, an anchor bill that hopefully at least has, kind of like some of these other things, we use their own playbook against them. It's like, now the state has declared that it does have authority to legislate in this arena, and we're going to. Yes, sir. You had a question back here, and I'll come back to you. I can't speak to that specifically. What I do know is that Shane Jett told me recently that there are homeless shelters that, so they're, whether the guys came across the border or not, they're homeless shelters, and the Democratic Party is using the address of the homeless shelter as an address to register these people as Democrat voters. But, yes, sir. You're lucky to have Shane Jett. Yes, ma'am. So there is, I ran a bill that I called the election integrity bill when I could say it in the right circles, and what it was to give election workers a pay raise. So right now they're making 100 a day. We bumped it up to 200 a day. Why? Because you got a bunch of people that are a little long in the tooth running elections, and when they all die off, who's going to take over? Nobody for 100 a day. So, and it passed, but it doesn't go into effect until June of 24. What Governor Stitt has done with his executive order is basically appoint a task force that is convened, and then it's going to be dissolved in January, and the task force is supposed to look at areas where the legislature needs to take action regarding elections. So there's a lot of people in Oklahoma who are like, yeah, this needs to happen, that needs to happen. Well, some of those things, not all of them, some of those actually are already happening. Now, per our Attorney General, our former Attorney General, John O'Connor, he told me that when Mike Lindell came down, that Mike Lindell said to him, Oklahoma has got some improving to do, but you're in the top 3 in the nation as far as your election integrity goes. Now, that's fine. We're in the top 3 now. We don't want to sit there and twiddle our thumbs, and then next 2 years down the road, we're being infiltrated. So we're always looking, always looking. I got a friend of mine used to run an institution at USAA. They're big on cybersecurity. Every other week, he had FBI, DHS, some other federal agencies come in and talk with him and his board about cybersecurity so that the bank didn't get infiltrated by bad actors through the interwebs. So that's, the short answer is theoretically yes. Oh, yes, ma'am. Do you, the question was, can we get rid of the electronic voting machines and mail-in ballots? So right now in Oklahoma, the mail-in arena is basically for absenteeism. I would like to see it go to a no excuse absenteeism. Basically, you're either working on an oil rig or you're military and you're deployed, something like that. Not just, I don't feel like going, unless you're medically incapable of going, something along those lines. I'd like to see that get tightened up. Any other questions? All right. If not, God bless each of you. God bless Oklahoma, and God bless America.
I want to say a big thank you to Senator Hamilton from Cattleman. Okay, so